One of the things that I love most about my show is that when I travel the world, a lot of people tell me that we inspire them to want to bake. We inspire them to, want to go to culinary school.
There are television shows that come and go without leaving much of a mark. And then there are shows that manage to turn an ordinary family business into a household name overnight. Cake Boss belongs firmly in the second category. For nearly a decade, millions of viewers tune in every week to watch a stocky, energetic baker from Hoboken, New Jersey, turn sugar, flour, and fondant into towering works of edible art. But behind the laughter, the family banner, and the show-stopping cakes, there's a slower, quieter story playing out. One of controversy, fatigue, and the eventual decline of a series that once seemed unstoppable. This is the story of how Cake Boss rose to the top of reality television, and how it eventually came crashing back down. Long before cameras ever entered Carlo's Bakery, the shop was simply a neighborhood fixture in Hoboken, a small city just across the river from Manhattan. It had been founded decades earlier by an Italian immigrant family that believed baking wasn't just a trade, but a way of expressing love for the people around you. That philosophy would eventually become the emotional core of the television show that made the bakery famous. But in its early years, Carlo's Bakery was simply trying to survive and serve its community. Bartolo Buddy Valastro Jr. was born in 1977, the youngest son in a large Italian-American family. His father ran the bakery with the kind of old-world discipline and pride that only someone who had built something from nothing could have. As a boy, Buddy was constantly underfoot in the shop, watching the older bakers work, learning the rhythms of the kitchen, and slowly absorbing skills that most people spend years in culinary school trying to acquire. It wasn't formal training so much as an apprenticeship by osmosis. He learned by watching, by helping, and eventually by doing. That apprenticeship was cut brutally short. When Buddy was still a teenager, his father was diagnosed with lung cancer, and within a short time, he passed away. Suddenly, the bakery that Buddy had grown up in as a hobby became his responsibility as a livelihood, not just for himself, but for his mother and sisters as well. Running a business at that age, with that little formal preparation, would have overwhelmed almost anyone. Buddy has spoken many times over the years about how frightening that period was, and about how his mother stepped in to help hold the family and the business together while he figured out how to lead. Rather than let the bakery stagnate, Buddy pushed it forward. He began experimenting with more elaborate cake designs, pulling inspiration from sculpture, architecture, and pop culture rather than sticking to the traditional wedding cake playbook. Word of mouth started to spread beyond Hoboken. Local customers who once came in for a birthday cake began requesting show-stopping creations for major life events, and Carlo's Bakery slowly built a reputation as the place to go if you wanted something nobody else could make. Reputation alone doesn't turn a neighborhood bakery into a national brand. Television does that. In the late 2000s, producers scouting for new reality programming stumbled onto Carlo's Bakery and immediately recognized what made it different from other bakery stories they might have profiled. It wasn't just the cakes. It was the chaos of a family-run business, the loud personalities, the sibling dynamics, and Buddy's larger-than-life presence in the middle of it all. When Cake Boss premiered in 2009, it didn't take long to find an audience. The format was simple. Cameras followed the day-to-day operations of the bakery, showing everything from routine orders to absurdly ambitious custom cakes that pushed the boundaries of what a cake could even be. Viewers weren't just watching baking. They were watching a family navigate deadlines, disasters, and each other, all while trying to keep a business afloat. Buddy quickly became the face of the show, and for good reason. He was brash, funny, sentimental, and endlessly confident in his own abilities. But he also wasn't afraid to show vulnerability, particularly when discussing his father's death or the pressure of carrying on his legacy. That mixture of bravado and heart turned him into one of the most recognizable reality television personalities of his era. The cakes themselves became a form of appointment viewing. Life-size sculptures, cakes that appeared to defy gravity, and designs so intricate that it was genuinely difficult to believe they were edible. These became the show's signature. Some builds became legendary among fans, including massive structural cakes that occasionally collapsed under their own weight during filming, turning potential disasters into unexpectedly entertaining television moments. Other memorable creations included eerily realistic novelty cakes designed to shock and amuse, along with heartfelt commissions made for people going through difficult moments in their lives. Grieving families, sick children, and community members who simply needed something to celebrate. Those emotional segments became just as central to the show's appeal as the outrageous sculptures, giving Cake Boss a sentimental backbone that separated it from other, more purely competitive baking programs. AS ratings climbed, TLC and Buddy's team moved quickly to capitalize on the show's popularity. Spin-offs followed in rapid succession, sending members of the Valastro family and their employees into competition formats, rescue-style shows, and international versions of the franchise. Carlo's Bakery itself expanded physically, adding new locations and turning what had once been a single storefront into a multi-location operation with a national customer base eager to order cakes shipped straight from the bakery made famous on their television screens. Buddy became something of a media fixture beyond the show itself, appearing in magazines, on talk shows, and eventually launching product lines and cookbooks that extended the Cake Boss brand well past baked goods. For a period, it seemed as though nearly every corner of pop culture had some intersection with the Valastro family. And for the family itself, it was clearly the fulfillment of everything Buddy's father had worked toward, brought into the modern spotlight by a son who had inherited both his skill and his stubborn determination. But there's a well-worn pattern in television history. Overexposure eventually catches up with even the most beloved personalities and formats, and Cake Boss would prove no exception by the early 2010s. The very success that had made Cake Boss inescapable also began working against it. Viewers who had once found the show's chaos charming started to find it repetitive. With so many spin-off specials and cross-promotions saturating the airwaves, the sense of novelty that had originally hooked audiences began to fade. Reality television, more than almost any other genre, depends on the feeling of catching something fresh and unscripted. And after years of the same format, some of that freshness inevitably wore thin. Then came a series of controversies that did lasting damage to the show's wholesome, family-first image. In 2013, reports surfaced alleging that employees at Carlo's Bakery had been paid well below the legally required minimum wage, alongside claims of a demanding and, at times, hostile work environment. Buddy publicly denied any wrongdoing. But the following year, the matter was resolved through a settlement with state labor authorities that required back pay to affected employees and new workplace policies going forward. For a show built almost entirely around the warmth of family and loyalty, allegations involving underpaid and mistreated staff struck an uncomfortable contrast with the brand's public persona. Around the same period, Buddy was arrested for driving under the influence after being pulled over in New York City, generating a wave of negative press that further chipped away at the carefully cultivated image of a hard-working, family-focused entrepreneur. Separately, an episode involving transgender actress and model Carmen Carrera drew significant backlash after a prank segment involving a gender reveal cake was widely criticized as insensitive and offensive to the transgender community. Advocacy groups and viewers alike voiced their frustration, and the incident became a lasting stain on the show's reputation, cited for years afterward whenever critics discussed its cultural missteps. A further allegation emerged in 2015 when a former employee came forward describing a pattern of demeaning behavior and a hostile workplace atmosphere. Details of the claim generated substantial media coverage, adding yet another layer of controversy to a show whose entire brand rested on presenting an image of familial warmth and decency. None of these individual controversies alone was necessarily enough to end a hit show. Reality television has weathered plenty of scandal over the years without losing its audience. But combined with declining novelty, growing viewer fatigue, and an increasingly crowded reality TV landscape full of newer, flashier competitors, the controversies compounded a slow erosion of goodwill that the show never fully recovered from. Ratings for Cake Boss began a noticeable decline around 2015. Competing networks had spent years studying what made shows like Cake Boss successful, and by the mid-2010s, the reality television landscape was flooded with baking and cooking competitions offering similar thrills without the accumulated baggage. Audiences, always hungry for the next new thing, began drifting toward fresher formats and personalities. At the same time, the format itself began to feel dated. What once felt like a groundbreaking blend of family drama and culinary spectacle increasingly resembled a formula that had been run one too many times. Even loyal fans noted that the show seemed to be repeating beats from earlier seasons rather than evolving with the times. By 2017, after years of declining viewership, TLC made the decision to end Cake Boss after a long and, by reality television standards, remarkably successful run spanning nearly a decade. The cancellation wasn't a shock to industry observers who had watched the ratings slide for several seasons, but it still marked the symbolic close of an era in reality programming, one where a single-family bakery in New Jersey had, for a time, captured the attention of the entire country. Endings on television rarely mean endings in real life, and that has certainly proven true for Buddy Valastro and the extended Cake Boss family. Buddy has remained a fixture in the culinary entertainment world, continuing to expand Carlo's Bakery's physical footprint and branching out into new ventures, including an Italian restaurant concept in Las Vegas that pairs classic dishes with some of his signature pastry creations. Television, too, remained part of his life. He went on to headline other programs centered on baking and mentorship, helping home bakers bring ambitious cake visions to life, and he continued his long-running friendly rivalry with fellow celebrity pastry chef Duff Goldman in a head-to-head competition format that let both bakers show off their very different styles. Buddy's polished, family bakery precision against Duff's more freewheeling, sculptural approach out of his Baltimore-based shop. That rivalry, despite the competitive framing, has always been rooted in genuine mutual respect. Buddy has described their relationship as closer to friendly sports trash talk than any real animosity, noting that the two check on each other, share photos of their kids, and generally root for one another even while trying to win on camera. When Buddy suffered a serious hand injury in 2020 after an accident in a home bowling alley, one that required emergency surgery and months of recovery, Duff was among the first people to reach out and offer support, a small detail that speaks to a friendship that has outlasted both of their show's various ups and downs. The rest of the Cake Boss cast, many of them Buddy's own family members, have similarly continued building their lives around a bakery and the extended business empire it spawned. Sisters, brothers-in-law, cousins, and longtime family friends who once became recognizable faces on national television largely returned to quieter roles within the business, running counters, managing operations, and continuing to produce the cakes and pastries that made the shop famous in the first place. Even without cameras rolling every day, IT would be easy, looking back, to remember Cake Boss purely through the lens of its later controversies or its eventual decline. But that would understate what made the show a genuine phenomenon in the first place. At its best, Cake Boss combined two things that reality television rarely gets to blend successfully: genuine craftsmanship and genuine family warmth. Viewers weren't just watching cakes get built. They were watching a real family navigate the pressures of running a business together, argue and reconcile, celebrate milestones, and occasionally grieve losses on camera in ways that felt unusually honest for the genre. The show also had a real cultural impact beyond its own ratings. It helped popularize elaborate custom cake design as a mainstream art form, inspiring a wave of amateur and professional bakers to push the boundaries of what a cake could look like. Countless bakeries around the country cite Cake Boss as part of what first got them interested in cake artistry as a career, and the show's influence can still be seen in baking competition formats that followed in its wake. Cake Boss's story is in many ways a familiar one in the history of reality television. A compelling premise, a charismatic lead, rapid overexposure, a handful of damaging controversies, and an eventual ratings decline that made cancellation inevitable. But unlike many reality shows that fade into obscurity once cameras stop rolling, the business and the people at the center of Cake Boss have continued to thrive well beyond the show's finale. Buddy Valastro's journey, from a teenager suddenly thrust into running his late father's bakery, to the face of one of the most recognizable reality shows of the 2010s, to a chef who survived both public controversy and a genuinely life-altering injury, reflects a resilience that goes beyond any single television format. Carlo's Bakery remains open. The Valastro family remains, by most accounts, close-knit and involved in the business. And Buddy himself remains a visible figure in the baking world, still competing, still creating, and still finding new ways to put his family story in front of an audience. In the end, the rise and fall of Cake Boss says as much about the nature of reality television itself as it does about any one bakery or family. Shows built on genuine charisma and real relationships can capture the public's imagination in a way scripted programming rarely can. But that same intimacy makes audiences unusually sensitive to controversy and repetition once the initial novelty wears off. Cake Boss rode that wave about as successfully as any show of its era, turning a small Hoboken bakery into a household name, before eventually succumbing to the same pressures that end almost every long-running reality series: fatigue, competition, and the slow erosion of goodwill. What set it apart, though, is that its central story never really needed the cameras to keep going. Long after the show ended, the bakery and the family behind it kept baking.